Hello, welcome to episode 1 of Ground Up Faith.
Yeah, our episode today is Why Faith, Why Jesus, Why Now?
My name is Jeremy Jacoby, senior pastor here at Summit of Peace.
I am David. I am a pastoral student at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis.
And we're excited to have you joining us for our very first podcast. We're actually going through Luther's Small Catechism as sort of our resource. This is an opportunity for people to watch this podcast, become familiar with the Lutheran faith. Perhaps they're interested in joining, becoming part of our fellowship. So this is the way that we are approaching that.
Yeah, it's just kind of a tactile way that we can talk about this from the ground up. We're also with our coffee grounds, yes, that we can talk about this in just kind of a more casual way of what we believe as a Lutheran church, and we can answer these questions together. You guys can watch it, ask us questions afterwards, or leave questions in the comments. So with that, we're going to dive right in here. Oh, you want to talk about why we're looking at this book specifically?
Yep, we're using Luther's Small Catechism. Catechisms are books that are summaries of teachings of churches. The Roman Catholic Church obviously has had a catechism for many years. And so as part of the Reformation, Luther's Reformation, the things he thought that were untrue that the church was teaching at the time, he wrote a catechism sort of to teach the Lutheran faith. And so it approaches it sort of teaching us understanding the assumption that you understand Catholicism, right? Because that's when it was kind of written. So we'll kind of wade through that together, but everyone who watches this video has an opportunity to get one of these from us so that they can read along. You can read it beforehand, you can read it after, you could not read it at all because there's no tests.
No tests.
Yep.
Our confirmation students have a test, but you don't have a test.
And there you go.
All right, so right now there's been kind of this resurgence of people coming back to the church. I think just probably in the last few months, people are trying to figure out, okay, well, maybe there is something to this faith thing, and the grow of Christianity, I think, as a whole is kind of taking over. So the question that I hear from a lot of people is why faith, or why right now?
I think there's probably a couple different reasons. I think one, we're noticing a renewed spiritual interest. People are interested in spiritual things since the pandemic. I think probably part of that has to do with we recognized in that science wasn't the answer to everything, right? There's, in fact, more and more now we're getting told that maybe the science isn't settled when we were told that it was, that we just need to get on board with things. But also the recognition that science couldn't protect us or save us or make us feel any safer or better during that time. So I think that's definitely part of it. The research shows, though, that people, while they're interested in spirituality, they're not necessarily interested in religion. And so that's a distinction that we'll want to kind of wrestle with and unpack. But I think that's kind of what's bringing people back to at least researching and being curious about religion.
Yeah. So I guess faith, when you think about it, it's about believing in something. And what I hear from a lot of atheists, you'll scroll through TikTok and see debates online. People are saying, well, show me the evidence. Prove to me why you have this faith. And if you could prove it to me, then maybe I'll believe it.
Right. Well, I think if we start off, one of the things we have to recognize is that everyone actually does have some sort of faith, right? And what I mean by that, if we kind of define it that way, is it's something that orients us to this world, right? Gives us answers to the biggest questions, like what happens after I die, or why am I here?
Yeah.
Those sorts of questions, right? And so religion has always sought to answer those. Science has tried to do it since sort of the Enlightenment, but again, we see less and less of them always able to do that, right, to answer those kind of big questions. And I'd suggest even like an atheist who doesn't believe in religion, they're not answering the faith questions with religion, but they're probably answering them with science, right, or their own mind, right? Just there's something about us as human beings, we're wired to have this sense of the world outside of us and a purpose in it.
Or where they get their morals and ethics from, and what they put their faith in is that we had mentioned that you put your faith in a lot of different things without necessarily checking, right?
Right.
If you get on an airplane, you're not checking the credentials of a pilot, or go into a doctor's office, you're not checking the certificate on the wall, right? That we do have to, at least in some point in our lives, put some faith in something.
Right. And so when we look at sort of the idea of evidence, I think one of the things that people are looking for or assume is that sort of when it comes to faith, matters of Christianity in this case, that we're sort of checking our brain at the door and we just take it all on blind faith, right? But we do understand that there's part of it that is reason plays a part of it, right? We believe that in historic events that have been recorded, there's evidence for many of those things. But at the end of the day, faith is important because, of course, these things happened in the past.
Right. So if people want to believe in something, some people say, okay, well, I do believe that there is a God, maybe not the God that you and I believe in, but that there is something out there. And I guess from our Lutheran and Christian perspective, we want to put Jesus in that passenger or driver's seat, right? And so why Jesus? Why is he the one that, if we are believing that there is something, that he is that something?
Right. Well, because from our perspective, as we understand it, we think all of Scripture is written and put together to reveal to us and to deliver us the message of Jesus and what he's done, right? So we think it's really the theme of the Bible. It's at the heart of it. And so, Christianity itself has Christ in it, right? Jesus Christ is part of. And so he's the author, the perfecter of our faith, as the Scriptures say. But even more importantly, we recognize that it's about a relationship with him more than anything else. It's not necessarily knowing all the right answers, right? It's not even believing all the right things, to be quite honest, because all of us probably have things that we're wrong about because we're not perfect. So at the heart of it, we look to Jesus because he's the one that God has sent to rescue and redeem us.
Right. So if we are coming into this faith understanding that, okay, now Jesus will rescue and redeem us, but in order to get that rescueness, or the rescueness is a word, that redemption, right? What do we have to do to follow those rules and regulations? Because some people, like my wife grew up Catholic, and so she has what's called the Catholic guilt, right? Because maybe she didn't follow all the rules the right way. Or even the Jews that believe in, Yahweh as God. Well, there's 613 rules that they have to follow, right? So what do we have to do that to understand that religion isn't just about rules, but it's about relationship?
Right, and I think that's one of the biggest kind of differences between Christianity and other religions, and that is that basically every other world religion has something you have to do in order to have this relationship with the deity. Right? Mm-hmm. So if you think of Islam, there's the 5 pillars. So if you're a good Islam and do all those, Allah accepts you as a good and true follower, and then you get heaven one day. All world religions kind of have that, but from our perspective, Christianity is the only gift religion. In other words, we believe it's what God has done in sending his son for us. Now, unfortunately, other Christian denominations kind of sometimes get confused, whether the way they talk about it or even maybe what they believe about it. And so they can give the idea and concept that it is still about the rules, but that's a kind of a misunderstanding. In fact, from our perspective, I describe it more like a family, right? So every family has rules, but you keeping the rules doesn't make you part of the family, right? So if friends came over to visit your kids and they kept all the rules, you don't say, hey, you're part of our family now. Right. However, it is normal for you to have them for your children. And if you think about it, you've got young ones. Mine are out of the home. Mm-hmm. But early on, when you have young children, you have rules. They usually keep them basically to not get in trouble. Mm-hmm. Right there, it's a fear of punishment.
Or keep them safe.
Yep. But you hope as they grow, they begin to appreciate, all the things mom and dad do. They have a nice house, all that sort of thing. And so they keep the rules out of appreciation and out of love, right? I just listen to my parents because I love them. Mm-hmm. And similarly, that's kind of the goal that we talk about with our Christian walk, right? We may early on be kind of immature in our faith and focus on the rules, but the idea is that we get, as we grow in our relationship to God, as he speaks to us through his word, we understand our relationship is about him loving us, providing for us, and we love him back by keeping the rules, but also keeping in mind that he gives them to protect us, right? God didn't have 10 commandments. We'll talk about this later on when we get farther into the podcast, but he didn't have 10 rules, and he said, I need to make up some people to keep these, mm-hmm. right? No parents sit around and say, or no couple sits around and says, we have all these rules, let's have kids so we have somebody who can keep them, right? Nobody does that. And that's kind of, unfortunately, the perspective a lot of times the Christian church can give.
Yeah. So we're going to follow these rules, not because we have to, but because we want to. And now part of that is also having this relationship with our God, our Heavenly Father. So if we're going to give him that kind of respect, then we should be giving him that kind of trust.
Right.
And so what does that look like in today's context where we look like people that are trusting God.
Okay. Well, kind of going back to where we began, where we talked a little bit about, everyone has a way to orient their place in this world. And so when it comes to trusting God, particularly, I like to explain it two different ways, right? There's the intellectual assent. We trust what his word says, the things that it is true, but we also give a heart assent to it. In other words, we actually take comfort from the fact that we know he forgives our sins. His word guides us and tells us we have a purpose in this world, and that gives us a focus and a drive and a reason for being. And so it's trusting him with the big picture things, right? Like believing in Jesus for salvation, but it also in the small everyday things. It means trusting him when we get bad news, right? A bad diagnosis from the doctor, or bad news at work, or we're hurt by other people, right? We're trusting him in these moments that he's in control of them and will see us through them. And so we really want to look at it as head and heart.
Right. I have heard it said one way where people can miss heaven by 12 inches, right? Where you can say, okay, well, I have the intellectual knowledge, but I don't have the heart knowledge. And it's one thing to know all of these things or to know all of the rules, but do you believe them and do you trust them? Is that a way in which you're walking that life of faith?
Right. I mean, if you think about it, probably the only person who knows the Bible in and out better than God himself is the devil.
Mm-hmm.
But the devil's not saved. He has intellectual assent and knowledge of what the Bible teaches, but he's not having it guide him.
For sure. So if we're going to then believe that these are the rules, this is the relationship, but we hear something from Jesus where he says, okay, now when you do this, this is the only way. And one of the debates that I hear online a lot is that, well, maybe it's not the only way. It is a way, but it is not the only way. And people say, you do you. You can live your life the way you want as long as you're a good person, as long as you're helping out other people, you're still going to get to heaven. And that sometimes this can be very limited in its worldview of saying, well, no, this is the only way. Right. Why is that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because actually really almost all world religions teach that theirs is the exclusive way. And in theory, there's some other religions where leading a moral life that Christianity would call for could still also lead to some sort of benefit in other world religions, but really all of them claim to be exclusive, right? And so one of the things I've always thought when people make that argument, right, that it's just one way, like all these ways will eventually lead to God. If that's true, then he's kind of a jerk, right? Because he's creating a situation in which he's telling groups of people different things.
Okay.
This is your path to salvation, and yours is the only way, right? So I really find that hard to believe, not just because of what the Bible teaches, but it doesn't make much sense to me, to be quite honest. But the other part of it, of course, is that if there is a God and there is only one way, then you have to figure out which one of all the ones who are claiming to be the one way is the real one. And it's Jesus' own claim himself, his own words, right, when he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. But I think the other challenge for us is that when people hear this exclusive claim, it sounds pejorative. It sounds like it's leaving other people out, right? Like, again, it's a rule. It's a thing you have to do.
Yeah.
But from our perspective, what we believe is that Jesus has accomplished all that is necessary for us to have this relationship with God. And all you have to do is not say no, right? It's not this like accepting of it that makes God pleased with you or anything like that, right? It's just not a rejecting. It's just acknowledging again and trusting in the heart that this is what God has done. And so we think of it not really exclusionary, right? God's not the one that's excluding, but we are when we make the decision to say, thanks for that, but I'll pass.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There was an interesting story I heard from another pastor friend of ours that they had gone on a hike recently and they had this beautiful view of this waterfall. And he told people coming down, hey, you should really go take this path. There's a beautiful waterfall. And they said, great, thanks. And he really thought they were going to go look at it, and they never did. And he says, that was the way. You could have seen what was there, and to miss out on that when it's laid out in front of you. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing to either take or deny. So, another issue that people have, I think, with understanding the church and our Bible and religion as a whole, they can say, well, this is from thousands of years ago. And yeah, sure, God talked to them back then, or he spoke through prophets, or he spoke through Jesus, but he doesn't do that anymore. So why do you still believe in essentially a God that's gone quiet and isn't revealing himself in this world in the way that he was thousands of years ago.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. The New Testament itself tells us, kind of answers this question. It says, in the former days, God spoke through his prophets, but now in these last days, he's spoken through his son. And so, again, if you think about it, the Old Testament was all sort of leading up to the revealing of Jesus. And then once he's here, this is the way God speaks through him. In fact, when one of his disciples asked, hey, just show us, kind of tell us what the Father's like. And Jesus is like, if you don't know what the Father's like,
look at me.
Look at the Son.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we see here that Jesus is the one who is now speaking for God. And if you think about it, one of the challenges we even have nowadays with people who claim to still be God speaks to them and tells them things, right? We get new religions out of it, like the Latter-day Saints, other people who claim that God spoke to them and here's the new things to teach. And so I think one of the reasons God sort of made Jesus the last voice is so there's no debate about it, right? Or at least there's not supposed to be. We still debate in Christianity all the time, lots of different things, but it's supposed to be sort of the last word on it, right? What Jesus has said is supposed to be what kind of guides us. Now we do think he still guides us in prayer and other ways, but not probably in what a lot of people are looking for, which is, I need a voice from heaven that says, take that job, or, something like that.
Mm-hmm. I think he also speaks to us too through his word, right? Through the Bible, where we can have that moment of introflexion and understanding of, okay, that this is speaking to me, understanding that, yes, the Bible was not written to me specifically, but was written for me. And so now that I'm reading it all these thousands of years later, it still speaks to me. It is still God speaking to us through his word that is still active and living today.
Right.
And then also the other point to bring up, that people might say, okay, well, if he's not here physically and talking to me now, then I won't believe. But understand, there were people back then that were talking to him,
exactly,
and were not believing who he said he was, and not taking him at face value.
Yeah, I mean, I myself have had times throughout my life when I've wondered and said, man, this would be so much easier to, if I was back then,
Mm-hmm.
right? See the miracles, hear the parables, be easier to believe. But we see plenty of people who still didn't believe.
Right.
I mean, he raises Lazarus from the dead, and the Pharisees still demand more signs.
More proof.
That's not good enough,
Yeah. Wow. So, okay, so we've understand that there's this God, that Jesus is the only way. We are going to listen to his rules, follow his rules, because we want this relationship with him.
Because we have this relationship.
But to understand that we have a relationship, it goes two ways. That if I'm going to care for this individual or being, I need to know that this individual or being cares for me. And if this is not a two-way street, then
right,
I'm going to go somewhere else where I can find that love or that intimacy. So how do I know that this God cares for me?
Right. So the sort of baseline, the first one would just say in creation itself, right? The fact that God even created us, right? That he gives us all the things that we have, rain, shelter, all those sorts of things. Creating us itself shows his desire, his care for us, his intention. One of the things I've always puzzled me, or I'd like to kind of wrestle with, there's no answer, I don't think, until we get to heaven, but God knew all that would happen after creation, the good and the bad. And yet to him, the good, the having a relationship with each and every one of us, was of enough benefit to still create us, right? Even though he knew we would rebel and there'd be brokenness and pain and loss, that relationship is still valuable enough. That's kind of the baseline. But the ultimate thing is demonstrated in Jesus, right? The cross tells us how he feels about us, that his desire to rescue and to redeem us, to restore our relationship, he would send his own son, right, to die on the cross. And we'll unpack all the reasons of why and what that means in a future podcast. But ultimately, how he feels about us is demonstrated in the fact that he would sacrifice his son.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I also hear that people that might want this relationship feel like they're maybe not worthy of it, that maybe that they've done too much in their past, that maybe they were a Christian before, but now they've kind of strayed, they've gone off, lived lives of debauchery or what have you, right? That it's been a while, right? And what we see is kind of a resurgence of people that now that they have kids, maybe are thinking about coming back to the faith, but maybe their kids should go, but I'm going to stay home because if I walk into that church, I don't think good things will happen. So where do we meet them and understanding that maybe they don't feel welcome or good enough to have that relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we see this dichotomy quite a bit in our society right now, where a lot of people are returning to the church, and I think they're returning because they recognize their children do need some sort of moral fabric, right? They want them to have some morals, and they think the church is the place for that, which it is, but it's not the number one goal of the church, right? Is to fix our morals. It's to relationship with God and to fix our hearts, kind of thing. And then there's the corollary, right? I have friends who say things like, it's like, oh, I can't step in the door of a church, or I might get struck by lightning, or, we have repairmen who come and joke about, I don't know if I haven't been in a church a while.
Yeah, the first time in years I've set foot in a church.
And it's interesting because for some reason it's almost they think that God's only here, and he wasn't out in the world and seen when they were doing whatever I guess they are feeling guilty about. Right. But the problem with both those approaches is the idea that there's some baseline that you have to be at before you can be part of a church or have a relationship with God really again. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's in their minds, I think they kind of separate them, right? Yeah, I kind of believe in God, but I can't go back to the church until I kind of clean up my life. And unfortunately, what I think causes some of that is that what the church either teaches or preaches about that, right? Because we can harp on morals and so much that people think, well, I'm not welcome there until I get my stuff together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking of it as like maybe like a hospital, right? Where you're injured or you're wounded and you say, well, I'm not hurt enough to go to the ER. Right? Well, no, that's where you need to go. Like once you're hurt and once you're bloody and bruised, where do you go? Or even people that talk about education for their children, right? We never have, are you good enough to go get an education? Like it seems we never have, precursors for that. But now all of a sudden there's a precursor for you being good enough, smart enough, healthy enough to enter the doors to then receive the gifts. No, there's a lot of broken and bruised people here, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, parents don't say, well, my kid's not smart enough to start school.
Right.
No, the place you get them is in school, right? Mm-hmm. We don't say, well, I need to go to the doctor, but I should get myself a little bit better first.
Yeah.
Right?
So we understand that God cares about us now, that we are not too messed up to be accepted. So our final question here for today's podcast is, where do you even start? If you are confused about any of this or have questions about any of this, where do I start that faith journey? Because stepping into my car on a Sunday morning, to turn the key, to drive down the street, to come to the parking lot, to enter the doors, that for a lot of people could be daunting, right? And so they would just much rather not. And so how do you even take that first step?
Well, this is a great one, right? Watching the Ground Up Faith podcast as we'll make through kind of the basic teachings. And it's the asking of the questions, really, is the first place to start. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people think faith is the end of questions, but really faith is the beginning of asking questions, right? And so as you dive into God's Word, the Catechism is written to help you kind of guide you through it. It approaches the Bible topically rather than, a lot of times people just sit down and try to read through the Bible, which
front to back
might sound crazy as a pastor, is a terrible idea.
Don't do it.
Don't do that. You need some context for some stuff. You need
to
start some different places before you just jump in and read through the Bible. I mean, you get to the times of conquest and you're just like, wow, I didn't realize the Bible was so R-rated.
Yeah, some heavy stuff.
So the asking of the questions, the kind of making your way through this, talking to other Christians. Another great way is even just watching our sermons online. Same page as you'll find this podcast, our YouTube page, streaming our services as well as ways to just kind of begin to connect and understand. And then, of course, at some point, taking the leap and come to join us.
Mm-hmm. Or even also just going to God in prayer, right? That's something that you don't need us for, right? That you can, if you have those questions and want to open up that conversation, He calls you to have that relationship with Him now. So if that's something that you are curious about, Jeremy was mentioning that curiosity is that first step. And we have a wealth of things at our fingertips now that are so helpful, like YouTube University, right? There's a lot of things that are out there that can help answer some of those questions, but we still would like to have that personal connection as a united family of faith, that once we go through these topics, to still sit down, meet, and discuss, and maybe answer some of those key points where people get hung up sometimes. But that's kind of why we're making this podcast. We
Yep.
hope that you enjoyed this, our first episode of the Ground Up Faith. Join us next time with a cup of coffee as we explore a little bit more about the Trinity,
Yep,
right?
Trinity,
As we
triune
talk
God,
about-
trying to understand what this teaching of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is.
Okay.
Yep. So we hope to see you then. As always, continue to check out our YouTube page. And as we mentioned, you can ask questions in the comment section, and we'll kind of follow up with that as well.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for joining us.